Labor pains? Go to the hospital. I'm traveling W Mum. Call me when the baby is born.
My husband took off to Hawaii with my mother-in-law, leaving me in pain. After a few days, he called me to tell that the baby had been born. I told him the truth.
What do you mean?
I heard his dumb voice, so I hung up phone. I'm Laura, a 28-year-old office worker. What do you like to do in your free time? My husband, Harry, is also 28, and we've been married for 2 years now after a whirlwind romance. My in-laws live in the next town, but my husband is the second son, so he told me that he didn't think it meant living with his parents. When I asked him about other details, he told me that his mother was a traditionalist who preferred her first son, and there was a significant difference in their treatment. So Harry did not seem to like such. In fact, at the time of our wedding, my mother-in-law said that she had never seen a bride so beautiful.
The eldest son will take over this business, but he won't inherit the entire estate.
I had never counted on it in the first place, but after hearing this, I had no impression on my in-laws. At that time, my mother-in-law and brother-in-law were living alone in our family home while my father-in-law was away overseas. And when we visited,
Can you go home now that everything is done here?
Harry apologized to me on the way home for his mother-in-law's attitude. However, a turning point came to us. Harry's elder brother had eloped with his fiancée and disappeared. My mother-in-law had a big problem with her eldest son's fiancée and said something to that effect.
As the eldest son's wife and my daughter-in-law.
She pressured her and made fun of her. My mother-in-law was very much against marriage, but her first son decided that it was in his mother's best interest to protect her mental health and to marry for peace. This led the mother-in-law to turn off her affection towards Harry.
At first, I didn't like the fact that leaning on me because my brother was used to being the one who took care of me. It felt like he was replacing his brother, and I didn't want him to feel that way.
And he refused to accept such an attitude from his mother. However, his mother tried to win him over in every way she could, and Harry gradually softened his attitude towards her. And, a few months later, he disappeared.
My brother is the worst kind of man, causing so much trouble for my mum. Now it's time for him to return the favor. I am ashamed to be a brother to such a such.
I was glad that his relationship with his mother-in-law had been restored, but I felt a little uneasy about him taking her side any longer. Harry and I were in the same company and had the same days off, so we often holidayed together. However, Harry began to go out to his mother's house every holiday, as his mother invited him.
I feel sorry for my mum that she spends holidays alone because my dad is having an affair, and my brother is away, so I spend my holidays with my mum as much as possible.
That's what he told me.
I understand how you feel, but I would spend more time with me as a couple.
We'll go back to the same house on weekends. It would be fine if we could at least get the time off for Mum. I mean, Laura, come with me.
Have you forgotten how you were told to get out of here before, or how you were treated so badly? Besides, your mother wasn't very well.
Things were different back then. So how are you going to talk about the past?
Harry's comment surprised me, but I changed my mind and decided to accompany him on his visit to my in-laws' house with a faint hope that perhaps my mother would be there. On the following holiday, when I visited my in-laws' house with Harry, I realized that I had been naive. My mother-in-law met us at the front door, and upon seeing my face, she blatantly frowned at me. I immediately realized that I was no welcome, but Harry, who was complete oblivious to the situation, told his smilingly that I wanted to spend the
Oh, Laura, you must be tired from work. Why don't you take a good rest?
I'm working too, Mum, and Laura has plenty of energy to play around, so don't worry about it.
Harry's good-tempered words made my mother-in-law smile, as if she was up to something. And this expression was not mine imagination, but rather my mother-in-law began various things to me.
My body has been hurting lately, and I'm not sure if I'm cleaning it properly. Lara, can you clean the house for me?
At first, it was just this kind of, but gradually her demands escalated. She started sending me out to buy groceries and even arranged gifts for relatives and friends' houses. While I was dealing with my mother's requests, Harry and my mother-in-law were enjoying their holidays, going out to eat, to the movies, and getting massages. After the first few times, I told her,
I'll stop going to your parents' house because all I do is help your mother go out with her friends, so there's no point in going.
As a wife, you could at least help your husband's parents' house. Besides, we go to the house and leave together, and in return, I'm out to dinner.
So he refused my suggestion of not accompanying him to his mother's house. He said dinner, but it was just a few bites at a restaurant. However, I can disagree with his opinion because the daughter-in-law and ended up having to cook for him, which meant that I couldn't rest at all. The reason I didn't want to go to my in-laws' house wasn't only because of this, but also because of something else. Mindless words from my mother-in-law and Harry E.
You were so cheerful when you were with me, so stop being so grumpy when helping my mother.
Harry's ex-girlfriends used to smile all the time.
The only reason you couldn't come to us in the first place was that you were too slow with your cleaning and stuff. How can you do your job like that?
Harry and my mother-in-law not only help me with my work, but they also help my parents.
How in the world did your parents become so slow at house chores? Even the last time I asked you to arrange for my relatives, you chose something that made me feel as if our house was poorly decorated.
I was asked to send gifts to my relatives, and my mother-in-law had to pay for them.
You always live off of Harry's money. Should pay for at least one occasion.
She forced me to do so.
We both work, so we live in our salon together.
Are you saying that Harry's salary enough?
No, it's not like that.
My mother-in-law and I had a conversation that she twisted my words, so decided to have a dialogue with her and follow her instructions about the gift. However, when one of the relatives received the gift, they contacted me to tell me that my mother-in-law was now complaining about the kind of gift I had given.
My salary is in that high, so I can send anything too expensive, but it's appropriate for you. I still think it would be better for you to choose something.
As expected, I was also angry with my mother-in-law's unreasonable complaints, and I talked back. My mother-in-law still wanted to say something.
That's why I hate poor people.
And so she ended the conversation. My mother-in-law seemed to have told the story to Harry.
What did you say to Mom? You want me to do what?
Harry was not in a good mood.
She didn't like the gift I arranged with my relatives and called me poor, so I told her to make her own arrangements next time.
My mum just tries to teach you how along with your relatives as a wife, so she asked you to do so.
I've never met these relatives and didn't even congratulate me on my mate. I can't send such an expensive gift to someone who is just my husband's relative.
Harry sighed deliberately in response and said, "I'm not sure."
No, I won't.
I simply answered him, went into and broke off the conversation. I had somehow sensed that my relationship with Harry was cooling down, so I decided to do something about it, but then found out that I was pregnant. When I told Harry about the pregnancy, he was so happy that I was surprised by his reaction.
I'm going to work harder for you and child, so if there's anything I can help, please let me know right away.
He stopped going back to his in-laws' place for a while and did household chores on and off to take care of me, which made me happy in the early stages of my pregnancy. As I had been feeling lonely, I decided to change my attitude. And then I reported it to my mother, who was at home with my father-in-law, who was away overseas.
I'm coming home once to celebrate.
He was going to visit me. My mother-in-law was very eager to know the sex of the child, and she repeatedly asked us,
Since this is your first child, you birth to a healthy boy and raise the heir to our family.
When I found out the sex of the Chihuahua, I wondered whether to tell my mother-in-law. Then, when I was in the stable stage pregnancy, I visited my parents' aunt. And at that time, my mother-in-law was a nurse in the hospital.
If it's a boy, we'll take him in and raise him ourselves. My grandchildren will be happier if raised by me, who raised my 2 sons, than by a mother like you.
Harry was also impressed by her words.
Lara, you need to work. And if I take care of the child, you can focus on your work harder.
I felt a sense of crisis at this. Tin decided to say.
The child is a girl.
I immediately lied. Then, my mother-in-law looked at me with obvious displeasure and said,
Then you should take care of it yourself because I have no obligation to raise. Next time, have a boy.
I was stunned by this statement from my mother-in-law, but I remember feeling somewhat relieved that she would not interfere with me in any way. After this pregnancy report, my mother-in-law requested I help her do the chores.
Since you got in the stable period, clean our house.
However, I managed to avoid this request by doing everything in my power to avoid any contact with my mother-in-law during the pregnancy.
Since your mother is going to be a grandmother, wouldn't it be better for you to have a relationship with her now, for the sake of the child?
You're saying something like that, but she hates me.
I replied briefly to Harry, who had begun to take my mother-in-law's side. He started going out with her every other weekend. And this, although it was so close to date.
Once the baby is born, I won't be able to spend as much time with my mum. So save some time to spend alone with her while I still can.
They even made plans for a trip to.
The baby will be born soon and we predict the due date, so exactly. So don't go on a trip overseas.
I asked Harry repeatedly, but he wouldn't listen to me at all. So I decided to tell my parents about the whole situation in an emergency. The reason I hadn't talked to my parents about it before was that if I did, they would certainly recommend a divorce, which I wanted to avoid because I was hoping for an alternative solution. Then, a few weeks before my due date, I had tremendous contractions. Coincidentally, Harry and I were scheduled to leave for Hawaii that evening, and my contractions started at noon. So I felt bad that their trip would be canceled, but I asked Harry to come with me to the hospital because I was having contractions. Harry rushed to take me to the hosp.
Does that mean you are going to have today?
He asked the doctor.
It's prodromal labor, so it won't happen right away, but in a few hours.
He heard the doctor's reply.
You are in the hospital. So if anything goes wrong, it won't be a problem. The baby has been born. I've been on the phone with my mum for a while now, rushing me to hurry up.
He walked away from the hospital. The doctors and nurses' attempts to him. I was so disappointed in Harry's behavior that I was left in a daze and immediately contacted my parents. I couldn't give them any details of the situation, but my mother rushed to the hospital and my father arrived later. My husband wasn't there at the time, and I delivered a healthy baby boy day. While at the hospital, during my recovery, I explained to my parents what had happened. And they were, of course, furious with me for getting a divorce right away. On the third night after the birth of my child, I received a call from Harry.
I couldn't call you easily because of the time difference. Is it time to be born yet?
Your daughter is no longer with us.
What do you mean?
I gave birth to a boy, so I never daughter in the first place.
I suddenly remembered the lie I had told her earlier and decided to shock Harry's mother-in-law.
I can't live with you anymore, Harry. Could you go on an overseas trip at a moment's notice.
We don't need a wife who can't even child.
I could hear his mother yelling behind him. Harry was putting the phone on speaker so he could listen to his mother talk about their child. I decided to put mine on speaker as my parents were in the room with me so they could hear it too.
So, do you agree that we will get divided?
I didn't recognize you as my daughter at all, to begin with.
So, you made complete stranger pay gifts for your relatives?
Don't talk to me like I'm a hustler.
Then please return the money.
I'll return such a small amount of miser.
My parents were angry when they heard what my mother-in-law had said.
You haven't even had a child yet, but you're brazen enough to call yourself my daughter-in-law.
I had a child, and it's a healthy boy. I will raise him well, so it's none business.
A boy? Then he is the heir of our family.
My mother-in-law's voice brightened at my words, and I couldn't bear.
That's not true. You've talked so much about me, and you're so brazen as son your heir. Please hear the rest from the lawyer. You come back to the U.S.
I hang up the phone, listening to my mother-in-law and Harry ranting over the phone. Then, after leaving the hospital, I immediately returned to my parents' house and started to prepare for the divorce. With the help of my parents, Upon hearing this news, my father paid a visit to my parents' house before, and my mother-in-law returned and listened to the recording of the phone call. I have been treated with respect, kindness, and understanding by all the staff at this clinic. They have always taken time to listen to my concerns and answer any questions that I may have had. He also went to the maternity hospital where the doctor who had treated me had told him about Harry's behavior. A few days later, when they returned, they were met by my father and my lawyer, who had already begun discussions before the meeting even began. Here, I demanded a divorce and child from Harry.
If we had known the child was a boy, we would not have treated our dear daughter-in-law like that.
My mother-in-law countered that she had been a good wife to her husband and that he had never complained about her cooking.
What do you mean by that kind of treatment?
That's what my father-in-law asked my mother-in-law, and as expected, she clammed up.
I couldn't mention everything to him on the phone, but I had to tell him about the other day's conversation. Didn't want to hide it from him.
You recorded it? Wow, a nasty person you are.
How dare you say that? You're talking nonsense. This family is not like that. We are modern and we don't need a traditional head of the family.
My father-in-law shouted at her. Harry had been mumbling something to mother's side.
Harry, you're the second son, so will you just shut up?
That has nothing to do with the situ right now.
He raised his voice loudly.
No, it has. I will sell this house and the money inherited by my eldest son. I'm cutting my ties with bloodthirsty people like you.
Do you mean my boy is coming back?
Harry seemed to be astonished at his joy at the mention of her eldest, and since then, he stopped talking, support his mother. I figured it was my in-laws' problem, so I decided to leave with my daughter, and a few days later, the divorce was finalized, and I was on my way to a better life. Apparently, my father-in-law has sold his house and sent my mother-in-law to her parents' house. Then he went to work overseas. He had been giving her quite a bit for living expenses, but after hearing about the incident with the relatives, he cut that living expense down to almost nothing. And my mother-in-law started working part-time at her own family's company. Harry first tried to take his mother his wing.
Because of your wife, I was evicted from my home, which was my only connection to my eldest son, and then it was sold.
He was so brokenhearted when he lost his mom. I explained the situation to my boss and asked if I could work shorter hours. This led to Harry and his divorce spreading through the company. And Since one of the employees, mother nurse working at the maternity hospital, of Harry's behavior also spread, and he is feeling very ashamed of himself. As for me, I'm back at home, just a little away from the office. But my parents are very excited about their first grandchild taking care of my baby. And I'm trying to rebuild my life with raising him comfortably. I have made up my mind that if I ever and give birth to a second child in the future, I will raise this child with love and without discrimination.